It's wonderful to be speaking in this atmosphere after Meru sharing those days with Baba, bringing Baba so close, and of course Mara, the love Baba had for Mara just came through in every word. And of course we didn't plan it, but I think it was just a wonderful way to introduce the theme of living with Meher Baba every day, or each day. Because that's what she did. And that's what we are striving to do in all of our lives. I think like all of you, like every one of us, I've always wanted to live with Baba every day, each day. In fact, when I first saw Baba in 1958, in this lifetime anyway, the first thing Baba asked me had to do with this question of living with him, or at least that's how I understood it. I was in the Lagoon Cabin, where most of you have been with Baba, and Baba was seated in the chair that's there, and I was standing next to him. And I know I wasn't alone in the room, but it felt so. I mean, there were other people, but they simply, I don't remember them, and they disappeared. And this was the first time I had seen Baba, and everyone really disappeared. My mother disappeared, my brother, Erich, all these people must have been there, Elizabeth, but I could only see Baba, and he was looking at me, and he was wearing his pink jacket, and he was smiling, and Baba, we were on eye level, because I was little, and he was seated, so we were on eye level. And Baba looked at me, and he asked me a question. Really, the only question he asked me that whole time in 1958. And I know now that he didn't speak orally. I know that because he was silent. And I know that I couldn't have been the exception, that he was silent all the time. But if you had asked me then, and sometimes people did ask at school, or, and they would hear about this man that I had met who was silent, especially by relatives. And the great puzzle to them was, well, how did you speak with him? And if you had asked me in those days, and when people did ask me, I always was tongue-tied trying to give an answer, because I could not remember him being silent exactly. I mean, I knew he was, but it didn't seem so. He seemed to speak. I mean, I must have on some level understood that he was gesturing and someone was interpreting. But Baba was so expressive and so direct, at least in my experience, that if he was silent, didn't feel so. And so he turned to me, and I looked at Baba, and Baba said to me, asked me, he said, would you like to go where I live? And I didn't know much about Baba, because we weren't told very much before meeting Baba. I knew one thing, though, that he was from India, which seemed a long way away, and I had no idea where it was or what it was like. But without thinking about it, and I thought that must be what he means, without thinking about it, I said, oh yes, with enthusiasm, because I already was in love with him. This must have been 5 minutes into my meeting with Baba, but I knew I just knew that I wanted to be with him, and which is really surprising thinking back, because I was very shy as a child. And I didn't run up to people. I wasn't open as a child. I was very shy. So just shows how Baba was, you know, how he could just open your heart, because I knew already that I wanted to be with him. So I said, just spontaneously, Baba, of course, always had a way of having you say what's in your heart without thinking. And so fortunately, my heart spoke, and I said, oh, yes. And Baba said, you will, like that. He seemed pleased. He gave me a beautiful smile, and Baba said, you will. And a wonderful footnote to that, many years later, at Meherazad, Erich brought out his little book that he kept during that time. And, you know, Erich took notes for Baba. Did you know that? So that if Baba gave some order to someone, Erich would note it down next to their name. You know? So he could, you know, keep track of all this. It's so touching, because, see, Erich was so alert, and he had to be the memory, you know, of all these things and people and all that. And so he would put down notes. And he gave me this little thing to look through of the notes he kept in 1958. And of course, I immediately looked for my name to see if it was in there. And I found his way of remembering. Because you see, if you came again to see Baba later, it's in '62, and you came up to Baba, Erich would say, Charles Baba, like that. I mean, Erich had to be responsible for introducing people. Even today, in his little cabin, you know, he has this list of people on the wall. And so he knows who's coming every day, and something of where they're from and about them, whether he's met them or not. So he's still doing this today, to make sure everybody is remembered properly. So he was remembering properly by taking notes. And I found my name, and next to it it says, Charles, it says, wants to live in India with Baba. And I thought, what a wonderful way to be remembered, you know. And so yes, always, I mean, who wouldn't want to live with him? And I didn't know then what I know now, that I can live with him now. I didn't. In fact, I thought of it as someday, somehow, you know, that would happen. And I didn't realize that what now we're all beginning to realize more and more is that the way we live with Baba now is preparation for living with him when he comes again. It's not as though we're waiting to live with him. It's the way we live with him gets us ready to live with him again and again and again and again, whether he's in the body or not. I mean, St. Teresa of Avila lived with Baba as St. Teresa. Francis lived with Baba as Francis. He wasn't in the body. So it's not a matter of in the body, out of the body. It's a matter of, are we living with him or not? And so I didn't know then that living with him now is a preparation for living with him when he comes again. And when he comes again and comes again. In fact, in '62, I panicked about this. And when we first got there, and we were seated with Baba the first day, the Westerners, and we were all together in this room in Guru Prasad, and it struck me sitting there looking at Baba that this was only for 5 days. And I was only going to be with him, living with him, you could say, for 5 days. And that I didn't have enough capacity to take him in. That I was too small, not physically, not age, but in my heart, I was too small. And I got panicked about it, because I thought, now, this is going to be over, and if I if I don't take a lot in, will I have him with me? Will I be living with him when I leave from this place? And I did not think that I would ever see him again physically. I don't know why, but I felt this would be the last time. And it turned out to be so. But I felt that. So that gave me even more anxiety. And my anxiety built as I was sitting next to Baba. Of course, Baba was talking to people or whatever was happening, you know, but I wasn't paying any attention. I was only focused on my anxiety about taking Baba in. And so I stared at Baba, you know, and I thought, well, if I sort of stare at him, maybe I can expand somehow and take more in. So I was staring at Baba, getting more and more anxious about it. And of course, not enjoying being there at all at this point, just anxious, which so many times in our lives with Baba we do. We get anxious, you know. Are we taking enough in? Are we really loving Baba and all that? And Baba, as soon as that got to a peak in me, Baba turns and he looks over at me and he reaches down and he grabs my chin like this. Firm. He grabs my chin like this, and he goes like that. And Erich didn't translate anything, but I knew what he was saying. He was saying, don't do that. I will give you all that you can take. Yeah. You can't take more than I'm going to give you. So relax, be here with me, enjoy it. Why should you worry about it like that? And so after that, I was shaken out of my stupor, and from that time on, I enjoyed being with him. And I didn't get worried that I wasn't taking enough in, that I didn't have a big enough heart, that, you know, I was not, whatever it was, I wasn't loving Baba enough and all that. And that is the best news of all, probably, Baba has given us, is that there is nothing to worry about. And especially there is nothing to worry about when it comes to living with Meher Baba. When we will, how much we will, whether we're worthy, whether we're not worthy, whether we can feel this or not feel that, because Baba has already planned it all. And he will give us exactly what we need, when we need it, and it's all mapped out. Every lover has the role to play that is mapped out. The script has been written. Better than Jeff's scripts, probably. Much better than that. No, Baba, Jeff, right there. They're great script writers, both of them. It's all there, so why should we worry about it? What a waste of time, Baba says. Why do you worry if I have it planned? And if I know what's best, why should you worry about it? You don't know. You have no idea. Erich gave me, because Erich and I, he sounds like I understand this point, but I really don't. I have struggled with it all the time, like we all do. Not so much up here, but in here you struggle with this point. And Erich has been for years trying to bring this home to me. Yeah, no, why do you, you people, I said, but Erich, we have to do this and do that, and but I say, Erich, if I do what you say, if I say it's all what Baba has planned, then I might just sit here and do nothing. And he says, you won't do that. I say, how do you know I won't do that? It's not your nature to do that. So I gave up finally arguing with him about it, I decided, well, he must be right. It is all. And I'd say, but Baba says in the discourse. He says, really speaking, I don't know what's there. He says, you don't know what's in the discourse? No, I don't know. This is what Baba told us. I said, oh, I see. Okay. What did he tell you? It's all in his hands. All right. So one day Erich gives me this saying from a perfect master, Bayezid of Bistami or something. So I never heard of this person. He hands this to me. He says, read this. So I read it, and here's what it says. It says, at the beginning, I was mistaken in 4 respects. And at the beginning, I was mistaken in 4 respects. I concerned myself to remember God, to know Him, to love Him, and to seek Him. And when I had come to the end, I saw that He had remembered me before I remembered Him, that His knowledge of me had preceded my knowledge of Him, His love towards me had existed before my love for Him, and He had sought me before I had sought Him. So Erich says, I said, all right. Baba has this planned. Baba, when we feel that we want to live with Meher Baba, it is because he has it planned. And we're already living with him, and the plan is unfolding. We wouldn't be here asking the question. We wouldn't be here longing for it if it wasn't already so. It's typical of us, particularly in the West, to do it the other way around. We think that, we think of something, then we long for something, then we work for something, and then maybe it happens. Baba says that's false. It's the other way around. He plans, He lays it out, God lays it out, then we begin to think of it, to feel it, as though we're thinking of it for the first time and planning it, but it isn't that way. That's the cart and the horse. Yeah. And Baba says to us that we have to reverse that. And that's the end of worry, to begin to reverse that. Worry is rooted in that, rooted in that we think we should do this and plan that and all that. And Baba says, that's not it. He has it planned, and then we feel prompted. You think, that's a good idea. Yeah. But it's the fact that we feel prompted, or the questions we ask, are already the ones that He has answered. So, if we feel, it's what Erich was trying to tell me, that I'm not going to just sit there and do nothing. I'm prompted to do things. Why am I prompted to do them? Because He has already planned that I do these things. It's not that I plan. So living with Meher Baba now is not only very possible, it's already planned. All the life that he did and that Meru described to us was in preparation so that we could live with him now. Otherwise, it's absolutely meaningless. Or at best, it's the life of a great saint or a holy person. But it's not the life of the Christ. The life of the Christ is a preparation. Everything he does is a reverberation, reverberates in our lives, is a preparation for life with him now. I remember even Elizabeth, who had a chance to live with Baba in the physical form, drove Baba around, as Meru reminds us, was there all that time and all that. Even she felt that. I was in the living room at Del Ruba one day and somebody was there. She would call me over for these new people sometimes that Elizabeth would be asked to meet. And she usually would be saved for the people, that were more difficult or challenging. Let's put it that way. I mean, Kitty saw everybody. But Elizabeth was kind of saved in reserve, you know, and brought out on special occasions for the really tough nuts to crack, yeah. The ministers in the town, or whoever, you know, who came. And because she knew I had this lifelong struggle, karma, whatever it is, curse, to be involved in religious things. So if a minister was there, she'd call me up and say that I should come over. So I would be seated there. And it was really very instructive to see how she related to people like that. But this fellow was this was soon after Baba dropped the body, this fellow was being very compassionate. And he was commiserating, you know, he wanted to be kind. It may have even been the minister of her church. I don't remember that. But he said, well, Mrs. Patterson, you could tell he was kind of awkward. He didn't know quite how to say it. He said, you know, Mrs. Patterson, just want you to know that I understand how much, you know, you must miss Mayor Baba. And she looked up and she smiled, very spontaneous, without thinking. She said, "Oh, no," she said, "don't you see, he's so much more available now." I never forgot. I'm not sure what he thought. So the question really is, and it's a question Baba has already answered, but we are discovering the answer in our individual lives. That is, how do we avail ourselves of this availability of His? How do we take advantage of it? And even to ask that question means that we are destined to take advantage of it, each in our own way. So it's not to be anxious, not an anxious question, like mine sitting there with Baba. How can I take him in? It's really a wonderful question because it's already answered. And it's the joy of our life that we even ask the question. And I thought of two ways that Baba has helped me, begun to help me a little bit anyway, to avail myself, if you will, of his availability. The two ways are in listening to Baba and in nurturing Baba. And I'll try to say a little bit about each of these in the time we have. The quote that came to me about listening to Baba comes from actually The Imitation of Christ, if you've read that, by Thomas à Kempis. You've memorized that, have you? Well, some people have read it, and somebody actually sent this to me because I don't remember reading this book, but I'm sure I did in some time or another. And in Thomas à Kempis, Jesus speaks in this book, and he says something very beautiful. He says, "Willingly would I speak my word and reveal my hidden things if you would diligently observe my coming and open to me the door of your heart." So Jesus says, "Willingly would I speak my word and reveal my hidden things if you would diligently observe my coming and open to me the door of your heart." And it does take not only listening, but as you know, it takes a great deal of trust. Because to listen means one has to trust what one is going to hear. And one has to trust that God actually speaks within our hearts. It sounds like we should believe that. It sounds like that's something that would be easy to accept. But to trust that it's so, as you well know, is something else again. Trust is not easily come by. That's why we worry. And also we think we're unworthy. And who are we for God to speak in our hearts? So then we ask somebody else, what did he say? What is he saying? You know, and then we go to workshops and things and say, well, can you tell me what he's saying? You know, we're always looking for somebody to give us a clue to what he's saying in our hearts, because it's hard to trust what he's saying. But we can trust it, not because we are worthy or have the capacity or have big hearts or great spiritual development, but because Baba said, that's what I've come to do. I have come to awaken myself in your heart, and you can depend on it. In my heart, in your heart, everyone's heart. And to feel connected with Baba is to know that he's done that in our hearts. For anyone connected with Baba. And we don't have to be worthy or aware or developed or whatever it is. We simply have to trust that he is telling us the truth. And that his whole life did end in that victory that he can speak in our hearts if he wants to. He's capable of doing that. And even when he was in physical form, Baba was very careful, I think, to give us clear picture that the answer to everything is within each of us. I think Baba went to great pains to do that. I mean, after all, Baba could have just told us what's in us. Right? I mean, if he knows everything, it was much more difficult for Baba to withhold what he knew and to have us find it out ourselves. Sometimes people now with Meher Baba think, well, gee, in the good old days one could just simply ask Baba. And that's true to a certain extent. But really speaking, it was also Baba always evoking from deep within the answer. And he made clear this many, many, many times, over and over again. Hundreds and hundreds of stories. One comes to mind in 62. It comes to mind because it was a painful moment in my mother's life at that time when we went to India, because she, after wanting this job in the theater, had gotten a job. It doesn't matter the details. She'd gotten this job. And those of you who are in the arts know it's not easy to be an artist. And you get a job and it's very exciting. And just before we were left to go to India, as I remember it, a cable came, we've given it to someone else. She was devastated. But we were on our way to Baba. So we went and we were seated with Baba. And Baba, as was his way, very natural, Baba would ask people different things, and Baba would make everyone feel at home, and family and all that. I mean, just that alone should give Baba away, that quality, I mean, again, no one sat there and thought, let's see, if he's the avatar, why is he asking me about, are my children well, or how old are they now, and all that? No one thought that. Isn't that remarkable? Why didn't we think that? Because he, in his unknowing, let us know that he knew our hearts. That's how he was. So one never stopped to think, well, why doesn't he know? You knew he knew, but you knew he knew in a way that was transcending all of these questions and answers. The questions and answers were our way of relating to him, and he to us. So he would say, how did you sleep? Well, pretty well, Bob. Who didn't sleep well? I remember he asked this one morning, he said, did everyone sleep well? Because everyone wanted to sleep well because we knew Baba wanted us to sleep well. And so, it took some courage to raise your hand. And this one fellow raised his hand that he didn't sleep well. You didn't sleep well? No, Baba, I didn't sleep well. I will give you 5 minutes with me, and alone with me, since you didn't sleep well. And then Baba looked at all of us, and Baba said, now everybody's going to raise their hand. So we were all sitting there, and that was how it was. Baba was asking questions, and suddenly he turns to my mother, and he says, Jane. She was seated by his shoulder over here. He says, Jane, What work have you? And Baba has a way of stopping the mind, because she was paralyzed. She didn't know whether she had lost her job, and she didn't. So all of those thoughts about what work and what she's going to do just paralyzed her mind, so her heart spoke, which of course is where Baba speaks. Baba wasn't speaking sitting in that chair. Baba speaks in the heart. And she said spontaneously, "Your work, Baba." When Baba wanted something to really be real in our hearts and taken seriously in our lives, he evokes it from deep within. I mean, I suppose that Baba could have, I mean, I don't want to be facetious, but Baba could have looked at Jane and said, he's the avatar, you know, he knows everything. Jane, in a few years, gradually, your theater career will sort of die out. Then you'll go to Myrtle Beach and you'll work for you'll help Elizabeth and Kitty. Yeah. Just wanted you to know that's what's going to happen. Well, he could have done that. Why didn't he do that? Because it wouldn't have meant much. It wouldn't have meant much at all. Unless it comes from deep within ourselves, what does it mean? Is it some sort of psychic reading? Is that what we want? Somebody to tell us? How do we feel about that? Maybe we feel a little comforted. But if it doesn't come from deep within us, it doesn't mean anything. Baba out here came only to awaken Baba in here. In here. That's all. He said that over and over again. That's not my idea. That's all. That's the only reason he came, for that, to break God's silence in our hearts. Everything was for that. Now, either that's true or it's not true. As Baba says, I'm either an ordinary man or I'm the highest of the high. It's not anything in between. So of course Baba wants us to hear him within, not because it's a nice thing, not because he's no longer around physically to ask, but because that's all he worked for his whole life. It's the whole point of his life. And if it doesn't come from within our hearts, then it's not love. And it's not guidance. It's something, once again, imposed on people. Baba never, as Elizabeth used to say, Baba never put things in from out. He drew things from within, out. That was his way. That's why he appeared not to know, even though he knew. That's why he took on not knowing, so that he in us could speak. But he is the one who awakens us to hear when he speaks. We don't do that. So I don't mean to suggest, when I say, we must learn to listen to Baba, that somehow if we just work hard enough, then we'll learn to listen to Baba. But it is true that listening to Baba requires a certain amount of trust and acceptance that Baba is speaking to us. I mean, if Baba is speaking constantly, it's one thing. If we're listening, it's another. But even to think, Baba, I want to listen, Baba, I want to hear you, means that we already have the capacity to do so. That's the good news. So important was this to Baba that he said many years ago that we should rely first and foremost on what we hear deep within ourselves. He said this, "Do nothing, even to please me or the world, against the dictates of your conscience. Unhesitatingly do what you think to be right and proper, despite the opposition of the world. Let your mind be as firm as a rock that resists strong blasts of wind from all sides. So even if the whole world was to say, what you're doing is not right, or you don't understand Baba, you see, Baba says this, Baba wants you to do that. Even if the whole world were to say that, even if the closest people to Baba were to tell you that, if that's not what you feel deep within your heart, and that's not what your conscience speaks, by which Baba meant the capacity to know what's right and what's wrong from Baba, then we shouldn't do it. And we should stick to it. If no one else sees it, we should stick to it. That's how I take it from Baba. That's what I think Baba means when he wants us to really listen with the ears of the heart to what he's saying, and not with the mind. Now Elizabeth is very, very, very practical. Someone asked me earlier, well, when you said Auntie Boo, who's that? And I realized that I slip into that. All these years now she's been gone, I forget that not everyone knows that we call her, the children called her Auntie Boo, because she couldn't say Elizabeth when she was a little girl. She called herself Boo. So when we met her, we were quite small, and she said, you should call me Auntie Boo. So I did call her Auntie Boo, even when I was much too old to do so. But she always liked it, even when we were grown up. She liked to be called Auntie Boo. Not by everyone, but but anyway, she was a very practical person. Baba says that he has two very practical people in his circle, and Elizabeth is one of them. She's most practical, and so she one day sat me down on the edge of her bed in her bedroom, which her bed was her office in those days. She had the papers piled up on either side and things on her lap, and she put her feet up because her feet often were swollen. It was difficult for her. So she'd prop herself up to do the center work, and the office would be the bed, the space of the bed. And I'd come in, some of you have had this experience, maybe not always, maybe you had done something that you shouldn't have, and you had to come in and sit on the edge of the bed to face the music. Well, this was not one of those times. This was one where she wanted to tell me something, and one of the things, practical things, about listening to Baba. And one of the things she told me was, she said, you know, Charles, meditation, Baba wanted us to meditate and to pray. She said, you see, meditation is the listening side of prayer. She said, they're like two sides of one coin. So it's very important to speak to Baba. But she said, but it's also very important to listen to Baba. And then she said something many of you have heard me say before, because it's been a constant source of inspiration for me. She said, you see, we're very busy here at the center, and there's not much time for anything. Baba keeps us very busy. But she said, you know, if just in the morning, when you first wake up, you just take a few minutes in silence to listen to Baba. And then she twinkled. She had a wonderful, subtle sense of humor, and she leaned forward, she twinkled, and she said, now, he won't give you answers in so many words like that. But she said, but the day will be the answer. And I didn't realize, over the years I've realized how profoundly true that is. I didn't at the time. Rumi says it so beautifully, as he does so many things. Rumi says, borrow the beloved's eyes. Look through them, and you will see the beloved's face everywhere. No tiredness, no jaded boredom. The beloved says, I shall be your eye, and your hand, and your loving. Let that happen, and things that you have hated will become helpers. And that's what Elizabeth meant. Everything will be Baba speaking. And the things that we listen for will be answered. If we take it that way, especially if we set aside time just to listen, and even though nothing is said, the answer will come. And Baba puts it even stronger in one of the, I think, the most beautiful things Baba ever said. Every moment I respond to the whole of creation. My response, being divine, is wholly from love. He doesn't say, sometimes I respond. He doesn't say, I respond when you think of me. He doesn't say, I respond when you're a good person or worthy. He says, every moment I respond, not just to one person, two, or many people, but to the whole of creation. What a great comfort that is. And, moreover, my response, he says, being divine, is wholly from love. Everything in our lives is his response of love. But listening helps us to begin to trust that that's true. And that's a great lifelong process to really trust that that's true. That's the one journey we're on. And the second thing, just briefly, is this notion that I feel about nurturing Baba. Nurturing Baba within ourselves. I mean, the Mandali we admire so much and we've learned so much from, men Mandali, women Mandali, they nurtured Baba. They cared for Baba. I mean, they were given that opportunity to do that, to nurture him, to care for him. And they took the opportunity, and that's why they were there, because they knew how to care for him without thinking. And Baba trained them even more of how to care for him. But he wasn't just training them or showing us. Baba was also training us to nurture him through them. Again, that's not my idea. I really feel that's what Baba has told us. That's what he was doing through them. And now that he's left aside that coat that he wore, that Meru talked about, he's put it aside, he gives all of his lovers the opportunity to nurture and care for him. And I know that we usually think of it the other way around. Yeah, well, Baba's the God-man, or he's God, or he's the Christ. He cares for us. But the truth is, if the Mandali's example means anything at all, that their nurturing and caring for him was how he nurtured and cared for them. And our nurturing and caring for him is the opportunity that we take. And that's how he nurtures and cares for us. He makes himself available to be nurtured. Saint Teresa talked of this. Saint Teresa of Avila, one of Baba's favorite saints, talked of this as building a sweet nest in the soul for him to live in. As though he were a baby bird, and he had to be taken care of. And that was an image she used to say, we should do that. We should build a nest for him in our souls, and we should take care of him in ourselves. Well, it's easy to say, well, he's not in the form. Does he really need us to care for him? He did not need the Mandali to care for him. Does he need us to do his work? As Baba says, I am perfectly capable of doing my work alone. He didn't need them. He doesn't need us. But he gave them that opportunity, and now he gives it to us. Why should it be any different? That's how I feel about it. Why should it be any different? Does he now not need nurturing and caring? This is my fantasy of it. It's probably silly, but this is my fantasy of it. I picture it as me behaving like this. That if one day at Meherazad, in the morning, early morning, the women Mandli woke up, Baba woke up, and maybe Meru, maybe Goher, or Katie, or Mani, maybe it was their duty to get breakfast for Baba that day. Woke up. This is my fantasy. And they woke up one morning and said, I'm tired this morning. I think I'll sleep in. You know, I get up so early every morning, and I'm going to sleep in this morning because he's God. He doesn't need breakfast. You know, why should I get up and get breakfast? You know, he'll be fine. He doesn't need that. And it's such a ridiculous fantasy that I realize, you know, if that is so absurd, then why is it that I neglect him so much? Why is it that I don't nurture him every day? Well, because I think on some level, I guess, that he can get along without it. And he can. He could have gotten along without breakfast. But he makes himself fragile. He makes himself available. He gives us the opportunity to nurture him. For his own sake, no. But because by nurturing him, we care for ourselves. And we forget about all the rest of us that isn't our self, our true self. Just like the Mandali. I mean, what time did they have to think about what I want for breakfast? What am I going to do today? What am I going to... No, everything, and particularly Mara, who is the ideal of this, everything. What does Baba want? How can I take care of Baba? Even when he was not there, the thought was, how can I do this or do that for Baba? Make him more comfortable. Think of his needs. Anticipate his needs. And that should really give us a picture, I think, of how we can nurture Baba in our lives every day if we take the opportunity to do it, if we take the opportunity that he's given us. And then we become more and more like Mara or others who Baba has provided as examples, as if to say, if you nurture me enough, if you care for me enough, then that's how you will be. You won't even think of it. Whether I'm in the body, I'm out of the body, you won't even think of it. Every thought will be for me. I'll never forget the wonderful account after the accident in 1952 when Elizabeth was driving Baba and this accident occurred, as you know. And Elizabeth was badly injured, as was, of course, Baba was thrown into the ditch. He bled into western soil. Mara was injured. Elizabeth was also badly injured. All of her ribs were broken. She lost use of her hands. And she was in the clinic there in Prague, Oklahoma, unconscious. And they say that when she woke up for the first time, when she finally regained consciousness for the first time, she opened her eyes and she looked up and she said, "How's Baba?" And that's what comes from nurturing him. It's that Baba wants us to strive for in our lives. Because then all that we think is so important becomes unimportant and simply falls away, simply disappears. Saint Teresa of Avila says something so beautiful about this that I must share it with you. She says, "Let us not imagine that we are hollow inside. You will laugh at me, perhaps, and say that what I'm explaining is very clear, and you'll be right. For me, though, it was obscure for some time. I understood well that I had a soul. But what this soul deserved and who dwelt within it, I did not understand because I had covered my eyes with the vanities of the world. For in my opinion, if I had understood as I do now, that in this little palace of my soul dwelt so great a king, I would not have left him alone so often." And Baba says, "Daily I support you and share your consciousness. Now I want you to uphold me so that one day you can share my consciousness." Jai Baba.